It's a place where many times you might experience sheer terror and sheer ecstasy all in one day. The ecstasy part came in when you saw the white cliffs of Dover. And the terror part came in when you saw those sparklers on the leading edge of little fighters coming at you. I think there were very few atheists in bomber crews. We got hit quite a few times, but we were very lucky. We never did get a scratch on anybody in the crew. The only injury that I sustained was when we made that crash landing in the Mediterranean on the seventh and last mission. I got a curvature of the spine from that. At least I have curvature of the spine, and I think that's where I got it.
Well, so tell me about your last mission. I'm interested to hear how you ended up in the Mediterranean, given you're flying out of England.
Well, I know that's a long story too. The brass decided they were going to try something real innovative, and somebody said, "Well, to throw the Germans off, why don't we leave? Why don't we depart from England, bomb the target, and then go to North Africa, where bases were available to us?" It sounded like a great idea in theory. It would, I'm sure it certainly had the beneficial effect of throwing the German fighter defenses off, since they had never seen such a thing up to that time. But it didn't work out too well, and it was never tried again. And it was never tried again, except in a few very rare cases, and that was to alternate bases in Soviet-held territory. I think that was the reasoning behind it.
What was the mission again? What was the name of the city?
To Regensburg. The target was located on a horseshoe bend in the Danube River, the Messerschmitt factory.
Direct payback, huh?
Yeah, it was a labor of love to get back to bomb that place. And the lead bombardier did a pretty good job. I never did get to be a lead bombardier. One day I had a chance, but the mission got scrubbed, and so we went back home and never did get to be one. Never did get to enjoy the thrill of having everybody toggle off on me. I would estimate it was about, from our base in England, it was about 400 miles. And we had a heavy gas load that day. And of course we had a heavy bomb load. And we didn't have much wind that day. You know, on takeoff, headwind is just exactly what you want. But we didn't have one. That airplane, it had such a long takeoff roll, I thought it would never get off the ground. It was so long because we were so heavy laden with bombs and gasoline. I was doubtful toward the end of the takeoff run. I was beginning to doubt that we'd even lift off. But we did, and after that it was rather smooth sailing. Well, of course, we had all the usual confusion, getting grouped up, which is nerve-wracking for the pilots because, well, for us too, but especially for the pilots, because every now and then you'd have collisions. Just imagine, today the FAA wants airplanes to be how many miles apart? 3 or 4 miles at least, maybe 5, I don't know, but it's measured in miles. But when they're forming up the group, they want the group to get formed up with the airplanes tucked in tight. And that is very dangerous, having aircraft wingtip to wingtip. Typically, when everything was going right, the neighboring aircraft would be about 100 feet away. You could see the wingtip would be, the wingtips would be about 10 feet apart. We took off one after the other, so you had the lead aircraft in the group would take off first. The takeoffs were planned ahead of time so that everybody knew just exactly when he was supposed to take off and who he was supposed to follow. So that never was much of a problem. The problems came in when you'd have turbulence in the air, you'd have patches of fog. That was when difficulties arose for the pilots in keeping the ships close but not too close. We got up at 3:30 and we were off the ground. It was still, there was still some early morning mist, so we must have got off the ground about 6 o'clock. We were in the air until about 2 p.m. before we crash landed in the Mediterranean. There was very little flak and very few fighters during the bombing run. In fact, I didn't see any fighters during the bombing run, but it was about 50 miles before we got to the target where the fighters and flak were really bad. You could tell when you were in trouble because the German fighters would group off out to the side about, I guess about 2 or 3 miles well out of range. Once they were formed up to whatever criteria they had established for themselves, then they started in on us. Sometimes they would form a group. I don't know whether they did it this day or not, but they also had tactics where they'd have another group off to our left, and they would alternate coming in. And they varied their tactics a lot. For example, the one on the left would come in and shoot at us from the top, and the ones from the right might shoot at us from underneath, from the side and the underneath. I never saw any multiple fighters come in. I've heard of it happening, but where 2 fighters would come in abreast. But I didn't see any of that. All I saw was single file attacks on us.
And so you were firing at them all this time?
I sure was. And that gets pretty rough because you're having to constantly swing that gun around to aim it, and the shells coming out on the floor, and it's hard to keep your balance and footing because of the shells rolling on the floor. And that cordite powder, gunpowder, was not very pleasant to breathe, smelled awful. But of course, the worst part of it was seeing those sparklers coming at you.
And did you ever feel you hit any enemy aircraft?
The tail gunner said that I got one. And this was, our training was so poor, I don't think I ever hit any on coming in on deflection shots, as for example, coming in at 2 and 11. After we had bombed the target, we couldn't keep up with the formation anymore. And on the way to North Africa, I guess this was about an hour after we had hit the target, a single German fighter came at us, dead ahead, which was an easy shot if you're real fast, because the rate of closure is so fast that you have to shoot real fast, that you only have a very limited amount of time to get in a shot at him. And I thought I had missed him. But the tail gunner said that I got him. Well, he didn't say whether he saw him bail out. He just said that I hit him. He said that he saw smoke coming from the fire. He didn't know whether he bailed out or not. Anyhow, he said that I got him. I might have just damaged him. This all over and done with so fast that you can never say with any accuracy, well, I got a straight out, flat out kill. All I know for sure, according to the tail gunner, I did flat out get a hit. But that's a whole lot, that's not the same thing as saying I got a kill. But trying to hit an incoming fighter on those deflection shots was like was not easy. The flak is sort of terrifying and fascinating all at the same time. You can look around and you see these little bursts, black smoke, just suddenly it's there where there'd been nothing before. And as you cruise along, the little puff of black smoke, it goes behind you. And then suddenly, sometimes, and in fact on the Regensburg mission, some of those puffs of smoke came in real close. And I remember a piece of shrapnel from one of the flak bursts hit an oxygen tank. That was very nerve-rattling because when it hit that oxygen tank, the oxygen in there, the contents of the tank, just suddenly came out, and that creates a large noise in itself. But even more harrowing is the fact that you know that all that oxygen is not good. Pure oxygen is not good being around the ship. A spark could just set off a conflagration in the ship. That was sort of upsetting.
So could you hear the shrapnel hitting the plane?
Oh yes, you could. It sounded like hail on a tin roof.
But no one was hurt? Did you see any holes appear?
Well, no, I didn't see any holes, but there were some. There had to be some somewhere because our engine was so badly damaged we couldn't keep up. And they had to feather the props one by one until they only had one engine left, and that was when we had to go down in the mid. Glenn dropped the aircraft down to a lower altitude, and he had to avoid getting it too low because there were mountainous ranges, mountainous country to the south of us going on the way to North Africa. So you didn't want to get too low, and which was put us at a disadvantage when we headed back to England after that mission on Saint Nazaire. It was a very simple matter to go down on the deck because there were no mountain ranges between Saint Nazaire and England. But here there were all sorts of mountain ranges in Bavaria that you had to avoid, so you couldn't just go down on the deck like we did at Saint Nazaire. It began to look like we were going to have a very hard time getting all the way to North Africa. That's a long ways from Regensburg to North Africa. I don't know exactly how far, but it must have been at least 700 or 800 miles. There was some discussion about going into Switzerland because Switzerland borders Bavaria on the south. K.G. Allen, the navigator, said, I don't have any maps of Switzerland. And I said, well, that shouldn't be a problem because Switzerland and Germany have a very wide border, and hitting the Swiss border at some point should be as easy as hitting a bull in the rear with a bass fiddle. So why don't we just do that and land at the nearest first aerodrome we see? But Glenn didn't like that idea. He said, no, we're going to go into North Africa. And he said, in case we can't make it to North Africa, perhaps we can make it as far as Sicily. And so that's what we did. We attempted to go into North Africa. And shortly after going over the Brenner Pass, that was when, I guess about 100 miles south of the Brenner Pass. It's the Brenner Pass goes between Italy and Germany. And I guess it must have been about 100 miles south of the Brenner Pass. That was when this Messerschmitt made a head-on attack at us. And I let loose with the trusty .50 caliber, and I couldn't tell whether I hit him or not, but the tail gunner said that I did.
It's kind of odd there would only be one Messerschmitt up at once. Is that not unusual?
I know it seemed unusual, yes, because the Germans kept their fighters squadrons together in aerodromes, but I have no idea why one lone Messerschmitt was at that place at that time. So we kept on going, and I think about the time we hit the Mediterranean coast, another engine gave out, so we now only had 2 left. And a B-17 with a light load on it like we had, the bombs were gone, a lot of ammunition expended, a lot of fuel was burned. It could easily stay aloft on 2 engines. And we did. We kept on going on 2 engines for another hour or two until we reached a point, I guess it was about 80 miles north of Sicily. We lost one more. And of course, you can't keep a B-17 aloft on just one engine. So that was when Glenn said, sent word around to the ship, sent the engineer around to get ready for ditch landing. So we prepared a ditch, and we were told to throw out everything that was loose, which we did, including the bomb sight, because the B-17, when it hit, it was going to the bottom, and it didn't make any difference. There was no point in keeping the bomb sight aboard anymore. And we threw off every gun barrels. We'd take them loose from the gun mounts, throw them over. I think he might have had, he might have been trying to see how long he could keep it aloft with that just one engine. The procedure was that we all went into the radio compartment, and the tallest man was supposed to get in there at the radio compartment bulkhead and sit there with his legs spread apart. Then the next tallest man would sit next to him. Oh, the direction of travel is this way. And so on down the line until until everybody was in that mode, a ditching mode, except the pilots. They remained in the cockpit in their seats. And shortly after Glenn instructed us to get ready for ditch landing, wasn't very long, probably about 15 minutes, when we actually did ditch. The ditching went smoothly. We were pretty lucky. The life rafts deployed automatically, just like they were supposed to. There were 2 of those little rafts which deployed, and we got into them, 5 men in each raft. There we were no longer airmen, we were now sailors. The impact was pretty severe. Since I was taking the brunt of all that weight of the other 7 crew members, it didn't do me a heck of a lot of good. I still have a curvature of the spine, and I think that's where I got it. I didn't notice it until several years later, that I had a curvature of the spine. But I finally did notice it, and I think that's where I got it. The guy just ahead of him, he leaned our heads were leaning just enough that we didn't bump heads on the crash landing. So as far as I know, nobody's heads got banged up. But of course, the man on the end, he had it pretty soft. The guys in between, they had it kind of rough. And the man on my end, being me, he had it really rough. And the ship, it probably skidded on the water about 3 or 4 seconds before it came to a dead stop. I would say we went from 120 miles an hour, which is a B-17's glide speed, for coming in for landing. It went from 120 to 0 in about 3 seconds, which is survivable, but can be very rough.
And then how long will the plane stay afloat?
About an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. It was pretty obvious that the ship was going to float for a while, so we didn't waste any time getting out, but there was no rush. It wasn't like getting out of a crowded theater when somebody hollered fire. Yes, it was an incredible landing, and there was quite a bit of conversation, but it was mostly, what do we do now? And what are we going to put on this raft with us? I mean, there was some thought as to how we're going to live on that raft. We didn't know how long we were going to have to be on it. But as it turned out, though, we didn't have to worry because there were all sorts of provisions on the raft, including water and including a little SOS radio. It was what they called a coffee grinder, I found out later, the slang term for it. And it had directions on it, and it said crank to emit an SOS signal. So we started taking turns cranking that little burger. And we were hoping that since Sicily, which was held by Allied forces, since it was only about 80 miles away, we were hoping that somebody in that neighborhood would find our SOS signal and come and rescue us. The only problem was the next morning, or sometime, maybe during the night, but anyhow, the Germans beat them to it. They picked up signals, our SOS signals too. And they sent this Messerschmitt fighter pilot out there. That created a little anxiety there because what if he starts shooting at us dead in the water? We were just sitting ducks. And as it turned out, he didn't. But we didn't know that because there were instances of people on both sides, Allied and the German, shooting at people who were in rafts, life rafts, sitting ducks like that. So anyhow, for whatever reason, maybe the Germans wanted to take us in for interrogation. Maybe they thought we might have some sort of valuable intelligence that we could share with them. But for whatever the reason, he didn't shoot. Maybe he was just a good guy. But there were lots of instances going on both sides of people doing dirty stuff like that. Anyhow, we saw this fighter coming, and one of our boys said, hey, that looks like a P-51. And another says, P-51, my foot. What's that swastika doing on its tail? Then we knew that we had been sighted. This was early in the morning, and about an hour after that, here comes a flying boat, amphibious aircraft, with a swastika on its tail. And they said, for you, the war is over.